I actually don't hate Rei. In fact, I think the concept of her character was a good one. However, Rei Batsubami was a mistake that'll be hard to rectify. Before I get any further, there will be spoilers for the anime and manga of Kakegurui. You have been warned. Where to start with Rei? As everyone watching should know, Rei is an anime original character, meaning her entire being in a manga is tantamount to my love life. It does not exist. All of the scenes that Rei was involved in either did not happen in the manga or they were done by another character. For example, in the manga, Sayaka is the one who introduces the Momobami clan to the rest of the student council, but in the anime, it is Rei who hijacks this task. Now, even though Rei disrupts the consistency of the manga, she doesn't ruin anything in a significant way. That is, until the last 2 episodes of season 2. Everything Rei did prior to season 2 episode 11 of Kakegurui was relatively harmless. It didn't interrupt the flow of the election arc. Where Mappa or Mappa, whatever the fuck the studio of Kakegurui's anime fucked up at, was creating plot lines that centered around Rei, one of which was the infamous 100 votes auction. And understand, when I say this gamble fucked things up, I'm not saying this out of personal preference. This damned auction assassinated all logic and might have killed a chance at a season 3 of Kakegurui, which I'll explain later. So, why is this specific anime only moment lethal when there have been other anime only moments that didn't have the same effect? Well, let's look at the 100 votes auction closely. The rules of the auction are actually pretty simple. Everyone is bidding to win 100 votes in each round. Bids are anonymous, players aren't allowed to collaborate with each other, and all bidding of votes will go to the auctioneer, no matter if the bidder wins or not. For example, if Mary bids 50 votes, but Yumiko wins by bidding 60 votes, Yumiko will win 100 votes for that round, while Rei, the auctioneer, will win 110 votes since she receives 50 votes from Mary and 60 votes from Yumiko, despite Mary not winning the round. If you're confused, look at this diagram thingy I conjured up. As you could probably guess from the example I gave, this auction is pretty smart to play on the part of the auctioneer. Rei is essentially pooling votes from all of the participants simply by capitalizing on their greed. As long as everyone isn't working together, the auction is a moderate risk for an almost guaranteed profit. Unfortunately, with how this gamble was executed, there arose many issues. For one, everyone conspired against Rei. Although it took a while, the players in the auction stopped combating with each other in the bidding and were able to win rounds by only betting 1 vote. This is total bullshit and unrealistic, given that 100 votes are on the line and mostly everyone is looking out for themselves. Forget betting 1 vote, there should be a lot of backstabbing going on with this whole plan that was devised between everyone participating against Rei. And since this gamble feeds on competition in order to ultimately aid the auctioneer, eliminating that aspect of the game really screwed over Rei in the most unfeasible way. The other problem is the question of how the hell did we get to the point of starting this auction? Keep in mind, there are 3,000 students in Hyakawa Academy, meaning there are a total of 3,000 votes that can be earned. For Rei to get this auction rolling, she would need to have 100 votes for each round that is played. The limit of the rounds played was how many votes Rei had, and the auction went up to 18 rounds. Which means that somehow, without the knowledge of most characters in the series, Rei accumulated 1,800 votes, 60% of all votes in the entire school. Now, even if you're thinking, maybe Rei didn't earn exactly 1,800 votes, maybe she used the votes she earned from the auction to put up those 100 votes for each round. However, even if Rei didn't have exactly 1,800 votes at the start of the auction, she would still have to have a ridiculous amount of votes. The explanation the anime attempted to give us as for how in the fuckity fuck Rei was able to get that many votes was that niggas practically gave her their votes in the hopes that she would become president. I could buy this explanation if the amount of votes Rei got wasn't in the thousands. Mappa, whatever the fuck looked me dead in the eyes and wanted me to believe that students willfully donated their votes in droves to some random bitch who is nice to a couple of people. And what makes this more laughable is that later in the manga, we learn that votes are being bought and sold. So picture this, with votes actually having monetary value, 1,000 plus students decided to give up their potential money in an effort to make Rei student council president. Also, take note that of those students, some most likely included house pets who could have sold their vote for their freedom. Instead, those students relinquished their vote to a transfer student who hasn't even attended their school for a month and has never proven themselves to be a good gambler. The final and largest issue with the auction is the aftermath. With 1,800 votes being allocated to everyone who participated in the auction, this creates a divide between the anime and manga. I didn't bother to calculate the exact amount of votes everyone should have had after the auction versus how many they had up to this point in the manga because that is irrelevant. The mere fact that 60% of the school's votes were redistributed to a handful of students makes the gambles in a manga that followed the auction seem nonsensical. For example, the grand meeting that occurred in the manga would lose its purpose since the objective was to have the top presidential candidates pool their votes in order to come close to Kirari and Terano in votes. However, as it stands in the anime now, if the grand meeting were to happen, the winner would have considerably more votes than anyone, which is counterproductive to the goal of that meeting. And it's funny because the people behind this atrocious plotline knew that they fucked up. They knew that at the very least, Yumiko couldn't have the vote she won in the auction or it would completely veer them off the course of the source material for good. They needed to find a pseudo retcon to erase Yumiko's gains in the auction, so what was their solution to correct the mess that they themselves made? Let's have Yumiko bet and lose all of the votes she earned off screen to random students. It's brilliant. At least it's supposed to be. And even if you suspend your disbelief and ignore that whole fiasco, the complications that come with having characters like Mary, like Midori, like Yuriko, like everyone in that damn auction is that in the anime, they have way more votes than they had at the same point in the manga, which again, drastically alters future manga events in a way that cannot be logically fixed easily. That, folks, right there is a season 3 killer. Although a season 3 is still possible, Rei, along with the gamble she orchestrated, burned the bridge between Kakegurui's anime and manga in a way no other anime-only moment in the series has done. And just so you can fully understand my last point, allow me to compare the auction to another anime original moment that occurred in season 1's finale of Kakegurui. However, unlike the auction, it didn't make the anime stray from the manga content to a big degree. For me, the tarot cards of Fate gamble only hurt the series by lowering the anticipation of a Yumiko and Kirari gamble since they have yet to gamble in the manga as I make this video. Plus, it was kinda fucking boring. However, the results of that gamble didn't leave any big scars behind. The wager in that gamble was the loser leaving Hikawa Academy for good, but since Yumiko and Kirari tied, everything went back to business as usual after the game. The tarot cards of Fate gamble was acknowledged later in the story, but in the end was brushed off as a minor incident in the grand scheme of the story. The 100 votes auction though is a different matter entirely. The outcome of that gamble is far too great to uphold the status quo of the manga. If Mappa or whatever studio wished to continue faithfully following the source material, they will only have two choices. 1. Retcon the auction in some ridiculous way like they did with Yumiko as I've already referenced, or pretend like the auction never happened, disregarding all logic. But that's not all, folks, because that whole tirade just had to do with the plotline that surrounds Rei. I also take issue with Rei as a character. As I said at the start of the video, the idea of Rei is one I can get behind, but she was handled poorly. Rei was an outcast amongst the Momobami family. As she states, she was treated like livestock and only found salvation in being acknowledged by Yumiko's sister. As well, Rei is a genuinely kind person who wasn't motivated by the vacant seat of the student council president. Her primary ambition? vengeance against none other than Yumiko Jabami. On paper, Rei sounds like she would be a great character and vital to the plot of Kakegurui, but that is far from the truth. To start, Rei's status of being an outcast in the Momobami clan has no type of magnitude in the present. Rei is supposed to be the equivalent of a powerless servant who is looked down on by the Momobami clan, but it doesn't feel that way. It is a classic case of tell but no show. We are told that Rei is viewed as an object, but the only part of her character that would insinuate this is her playing the position of a butler. Rei is allowed to roam the school as she pleases and isn't shown to be treated bad by the Momobamis. If we were judging by optics alone, one would probably believe that Rei was just an assistant rather than being a fucking slave. I mention this because I believe that Rei not being portrayed as more of an enemy to the Momobamis was a huge missed opportunity. Given Rei's backstory, if we actually saw her being metaphorically shitted on by the Momobamis, it could make her plight far more impactful. Imagine if in the present we seen Rei suffering abuse at the hands of the other Momobamis, but powerless to do anything about it. Rei would harbor an intense hatred for her own clan that we would sympathize with, but she'd be forced to bide her time, act meek, and wait for the right opportunity to make her move, which would naturally come in a presidential election. This would have made Rei's reveal of her true self, as well as her receiving a new name, much more emotional, because for the former, we would have been awaiting it, and for the latter, it would have closed Rei's character arc well by effectively rebranding herself and having her branch off from the Momobami clan. The next misstep was the failure to not utilize Rei in expanding Yumiko's backstory despite a good setup to do so. Yumiko does not have inner monologue and doesn't divulge any bits of her past. Simply put, Yumiko's background is a mystery. Nevertheless, with Rei, we had someone who could have been a lifeline to learning more about Yumiko, but that did not happen. All Rei gave us in regards to Yumiko was a strong implication that she had something to do with the hospitalization of her sister, which was already hinted at in chapter 46 during the Greater Good gamble. Rei's connection to Yumiko's sister had the potential to give us insight to Yumiko or maybe even the Momobamis as a whole. Instead though, Rei's tie to Yumiko's sis was only there to explain her thirst for vengeance, which is something else that flopped. Revenge might be an overused and cliche motivation, but if done right, it can hit. In the case of Rei, this is not one of those times. One of the problems is that Rei's relationship with Yumiko's sister isn't fleshed out enough for me to truly understand the attachment she has for her. If the attachment isn't well established, then seeing the quest for revenge isn't as captivating. The downfall of Rei's flashback is that it's short as midget shit. It felt as if it was shoehorned at the end of Kakegurui to properly explain her motivation. What makes it worse is that Rei never actively targeted Yumiko. Sure, the 100 volts auction involved Yumiko, but it was never structured for Rei to act on her revenge. And even if you point to the coin flip of fate, that gamble wasn't suggested by Rei, which makes her want for revenge look weak, since she only sought it when the opportunity happened to befall her. It also doesn't help Rei in terms of likability when both of the gambles she was involved in were, in my opinion, mid as fuck. To be honest, it was lower than mid, since I think it sits at the bottom tier of gambles in Kakegurui. Especially the coin flip of fate, which was off screen and had no real ramifications, as Rei was awarded a new name and still roams around the school giddy as a motherfucker, looking like a goof. On that last point, my rant is just about done. I want to close out this video by saying this. Breaking Bad warned me of half measures, which is exactly what I think Rei Batsubami is. Rei is not developed enough to be considered a good character. However, her plotline has too much of a residual effect to completely dismiss or write her character off. Rei is not good, Rei is not bad. She is simply a mistake.
Your soul, you're not in control, just giving you goals. Scared of your past, the future is closed. The start is the end is a start. They both are the same, can't tell them apart. Nigga, that's cuz the intro was the outro.